So why 100 theories? Doing purple today, like Susie. So you're probably wondering about my little ranking system here. I guess the tier names are pretty self-explanatory, but I'll go and run through it real quick with you anyway. I'm trying to refrain from ranking them based on how much I like them. More so, I'm trying to rank them based on how likely they would be correct and how good a job they do at supporting themselves. So, basically confirmed. This means that it's not explicitly stated in the canon, but it's so likely that you could treat it as true and it would not impact the game or your view of the story whatsoever. It's plausible as yeah, it could work. It's not solid enough to be treated as canon, but it's likely. Maybe if you squint, there's some evidence, but not enough to really craft a working theory out of. Or maybe it cites a lot of evidence, but doesn't tie it together in a way that fully makes sense or works with the story. Crack theory is, well, a crack theory. There's nothing to support it. The evidence is either completely unsubstantiated or goes so far outside the themes of the game as to not be really up for consideration. It's just my own opinion, obviously. You are more than welcome to disagree with me. Let's start swinging with one of the most infamous Undertale theories of all time. I'd break it down for you, but considering it's sitting at a cool 14-ish million views, chances are you've probably seen it. Basically, the theory is that Ness put his fleshy body into the Earthbound time machine, which can't transport his fleshy self, so he ends up as a skeleton in Snowdin. The time machine breaks and ends up in a shed with a photo of him and his friends with blueprints that are written by Mr. Saturn language. There's more connections. The overworld map is kind of similar. Papyrus has the thing on his chest. It's like a Starman reference on his costume, but that's the gist. So obviously this theory isn't true, but it's not a crack theory because you gotta understand, Deltarune didn't exist when he made this theory. So he kind of got some of it right, but he was using the Earthbound references that were in the game to try to kind of glue everything together, which was at least creative. So it gets to go up a level to maybe if you squint, because while he was wrong with the conclusion, he was sort of right in the way he connected everything together. All right, so this one, obviously a crack theory, but the theory goes that since Frisk has yellow skin and squinty eyes, that they must be an Asian stereotype. So, pushing aside why that's problematic, the very simple explanation is that yellow is kind of the West's default ambiguous people color, think a la The Simpsons, and the face is just the emoticon. Frisk is just supposed to look as neutral as possible. They don't have any kind of canonical race. Quick refresher, 7 humans have fallen into the underground before Frisk. 1 was Chara, the rest were unnamed people who were killed by Asgore. The theory goes that all the fallen humans were children. Toro has a box of various kid shoes, which the Dreamers don't wear shoes, but they also have adopted a human child, Chara. Toby mentioned very early in development that the story was about kids who fell into the underground, but that's never been officially canonized. I think going off how Toro treats you in the beginning, that this process has happened before, plus the existence of the tutu, I feel confident saying that at least 1 or more were kids. Were all of them kids though? I don't know. I don't think there's enough evidence to say either way. It doesn't change the lore much either way, so I think I'll just say it's plausible. This is a cool one that I never picked up on while playing the game, but when you see the opening of the game and it says 21X, it's actually showing you Chara falling into the underground. That's the twist. Between Chara and Frisk, 6 more people fall. Undertale came out in 2015, so if the game was supposed to take in what would have been modern day, and we give a generous 2010 to the Chara fall, we get an average of 1.2 people falling to underground per year, excluding both Frisk and Chara, which feels like a lot. And the monster reactions imply that they haven't seen a human in a long time, which if 1.2 is falling every year seems unlikely. Undying Papyrus's online handles imply that they were born in 91-95, which would put them in their 20s when Chara fell in 21X. If they were born in the 90s, which again, considering Papyrus has never seen a human before, nor have most of the monsters, it feels unlikely. If 100 years have passed since the fall, however, then we could put their dates of birth as 2091 and 2095, and that would make the rate of fallen humans and the monsters not knowing what humans look like feel a lot more believable. I think that this is one of the only way that the events of the game make sense, at least to me, so this is going in basically confirmed. So the monsters are stuck in the underground because they had a war with the humans on the surface. They lost, and then they were still underground by said humans. Now, why did they go to war? The monster's version of the story says that the humans reacted out of fear. You see, if a monster kills and possesses a human soul, they become a nightmare, a horrifying being of great power. But for the humans to discover this, wouldn't that mean they need to witness a monster killing and taking the soul of one of their kind? Obviously. History tends to be taught differently depending on if the country teaching it won or lost at war. So it's possible the monsters instigate this, but there's not enough evidence either way, so... If you play Genocide Run, once you reach Muffet's boss fight, she will say Alfie's warned about you, and that she left a passage open for her to escape, and that once she did, she's going to seal off the Hotland, so the player either can't get through, or it would at least slow them down, to where they could be stopped or yell the monsters out safely. Muffet, however, refuses to abandon her web, so that passage never gets closed and the player can move on through Hotland into the core. So the theory goes that the reason the Genocide Run can be completed at all is because of Muffet. This theory is cool, but there's a lot of what ifs in the air. Like, you could say maybe Fly would have helped you anyway, maybe the passage was left open for Muffet is a different passage than the one used in the game. There's not enough to say like, yep, 100% Muffet's the reason that genocide is able to happen. But I think there's enough to imply that she was at least a key factor in how it goes down the way it goes down, so we're not going down to it's plausible. This theory goes that the monster in the opening of the game during the cinematic sequence is Asgore. This makes sense on the surface. They do look pretty similar, and from the way Asgore talks in the game, it does seem to be the case that he was the king during the war, and has been a king for a very long time. The only real hang-up is the horns. This part on the image could be a broken horn, but it could also be a crown. And the horns do look slightly different, but that could also just be a stylistic thing, especially if this is an ancient tapestry, and we don't know if Toby had finalized the designs yet when he made this part of the game. So in my opinion, I go so far as to say this is basically confirmed, but that's just my opinion. Napstablook's internet handle could imply that he's much older than the rest of the characters, considering his handle implies that he was born in 22, which would either make him much older or much younger than the other characters. Like, if Undyne was born in 2091, then Napstablook could have been born in 2122, which would make Undyne 31 years older than Napstablook, which, if we assume Napstablook is 20, then Undyne would be 51 in Undertale. It's possible. Monsters do age differently, and Undyne does say that the snail farm is a family farm, and that most of the members of said family have moved on, moved away to the city, except for Napstablook, which could suggest that he's the youngest, and that she's been around for the whole lineage. The 22 could also mean 1922 or 1822 or whatever, and that he is an actual ghost, like a human spirit. But considering that the only ghosts in the underground seem to be the same ghost family, they all seem to be at least tangentially related, at least cousins or whatever. And since the monsters seem to generally marry monsters that look like themselves, that are in the same subspecies, I guess, I think it's more likely that these ghosts are probably more akin to a separate species than a literal dead human spirit. This is one of those theories that people treat as canon, but it isn't ever explicitly stated. The Snail Golf game in the Snowy Forest implies that the different color souls have different attributes, and since the soul that we use is red, and determination is a very prevalent theme in Undertale, it makes sense that you make this connection. However, allow me to introduce the competitions theory, which is... Technically, determination is only ever spelled with white font, except for the time it's spelled with yellow font. The stars that say X happened, your fill determination, the save points, are yellow. Flowey, the previous most determined person in the underground, is also yellow. But the yellow soul in the game is implied to be associated with justice. We actually associate red text in the game with a different character, Chara, who I don't believe is ever stated to have a specific colored soul. I think that determination probably is neutral as far as colors go. I don't think it necessarily has a specific color assigned to it at all times. So I'm putting them both in it's plausible because it could honestly be either, or it could be both, or it could be neither. So, Undyne is most likely a lesbian. Never mentions having any sort of male attractions, but she does mention multiple female desires. She says death's a hot woman, that the garbage dump is a good place to meet girls, and obviously she goes on a date with a girl in the game, Alphys. But Alphys, on the other hand, she does have a crush on Undyne, but she's also still have a crush on Asgore Dreemurr, who, is a boy. And the player, too. I don't know what gender Frisk is. And obviously, it might not be a crush because Frisk is like a little kid in the game. Regardless, most likely, Undyne is a lesbian and Alphys is at least bisexual. So while it's not a lesbian relationship, it is still a sapphic one, which is also cool. So you encounter multiple human items as you go through the game. And the theory basically goes that these items are lying here because that's the spot where the humans were killed. But all the humans that were killed were said to be killed by Asgore, who, you know, lives in New Home. And all the humans have left the ruins according to Toriel. So, considering you find human items in the ruins, this seems much less likely. Plus, some of the human items are sold by shopkeepers. So it seems more likely that human stuff just gets sold around or thrown out after they die. So we're gonna put it at maybe if you squint. So there's two real contenders for who told Muffet that you were a spider killer and paid her to kill you. I thought when I played it first it was Flowey, but apparently some people also think it might be Mettaton. Mettaton does mention hiring monsters to kill you, and Muffet mentions that the person who told her this changed form, which honestly could apply to either. You know, Mettaton could turn to the guy, and then Flowey can, you know, morph his face. Technically, Flowey has more incentive to let you live, so that he can take your soul at the end of the game, so the Mettaton thing does have some backing behind it. He's also right outside the Muffet fight, so I'm gonna put out it's plausible, because I think it works for the story either way. Undyne is unique among the monsters for how much determination she possesses, to the point of being able to persist beyond death in the genocide run. You know, Undyne the Undying. One thing that sticks out when she's in her undying form is that her eye patch gets removed, and we see her empty socket. And out of her empty socket, there's just like these beams of light shoot out. People sometimes interpret this as her determination literally shining out of her, which is a cool theory, but we never hear about how she lost her eye. So some people have kind of put these two things together and say, oh, she was injected with determination, like the other monsters in the experiments, but something went wrong and it messed up her eyes. Now her eye's gone, and it's also why she's more determined. And I think there definitely would have been some mention of this in the True Lab if this was the case. I think this would also mean that Undyne would know about Alphys' amalgamations, which is not the case in the game. And I think the injury makes more sense if you think the perspective of like, she is a role guard. Obviously she fights a lot of stuff. So I'm gonna put this down crack theory just because I don't think the evidence really connects together enough to be like seriously considered. Alright guys, got a little too overheated. I had to take the flannel off. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm trying to do like a Susie from Deltarune outfit. You tell me how good of a job I did on that one. Alright, this might not seem to have much substance at first glance, but considering he does fight you to the death and all, and if you spare him, Flowey kills him anyway. But there is a very specific scenario you can set up where Flowey does not kill Asgore. And in that timeline, if you do still spare Asgore, he will willingly offer his life so that you can pass the barrier and negotiate with the humans on the monster's behalf. So he will die, in this case, by his own hand. But that sounds like a sacrifice than a suicide, right? Except in this moment, he has a chance to break the barrier and free the monsters. He's killed half a dozen people before this. His family has abandoned him, his son is dead, and he doesn't leave the underground to collect the souls. He waits and hopes no one else falls in so that he doesn't have to face his duty. Is he suicidal in my opinion? Maybe? I think he's very depressed. And I do think his personality is a little cowardly, which I'm not saying that people who struggle with suicide are cowards, but I think an argument could be made for it. I'll go with it's plausible. So we know monsters are made of magic. Humans are not, obviously. They're made mostly of water. And we don't ever see Frisk use magic in the game. However, it is mentioned in the opening that it was human magicians who sealed the barrier. And I guess depending on how you want to quantify it, our ability to alter timelines and determination itself and whatever else cool stuff's going on, it does have a very magic feel to it. Some of modern humans can do it, but past humans could, so it's plausible. It's a fun one because this is one of those things that's talked about and treated like it's canon, but it's not. We don't know what Gaster looks like. This guy we encounter in this fun value room, this is a Yuboba reference from Yume Nikki, or at least that's what it's widely believed to be. The only canon appearance of Gaster is related to another theory. This guy is one of those gray shadow people that you can rarely encounter on your game sometimes. He talks about Gaster being displaced. And he says, I'm holding a piece of him right now. So is that what Gaster looks like? Well, he might look a little bit like that, but certainly not all of him. And what's to say the mystery man isn't also a piece of Gaster? I don't think we know what his full form looks like. He's been displaced throughout time. But like, considering his role in the story, I don't see any reason to believe that these both couldn't be different versions of him, like different broken versions. So both of those can hang out in is plausible. Obviously omitting the secret Gaster entry, there are entries written by Alphys in the Jewel Lab. The question is, are all of the entries written by Alphys, or is there someone else also writing them? Maybe Sans, maybe someone else. In my opinion, no. The entries are pretty linear and the tone and the style of writing is very consistent. I think the idea of multiple authors is cool, and I suppose it's not like fully debunked, but I think it's more unlikely than not, so maybe if you squint. The theory goes that every great character that you can possibly counter are all from separate timelines that accidentally got switched around into the timeline that you're in right now as a result of the Gaster incident. I guess it could be like ghosts or something like that, but I think it's more likely that they are just probably around when the machine he made went or however it broke or stopped being what it was supposed to be doing. So I say this is basically confirmed. This is a fun one. This is another theory that tries to explain where Undyne's unusually large amount of determination comes from. There's no evidence for this one apart from her having a more humanoid form and the said determination. I'm sure you could write some fun fanfiction involving, you know, a human person falling into the underground and then meeting a nice fish lady monster, but there really is no evidence to suggest that there was any instance of any ever human and monster coupling. So fortunately, crack theory. I actually couldn't find a good theory for Undyne's determination, so if you have one, please feel free to drop in the comments along with where you think you would rank it on this leaderboard. I don't think this theory holds, I'll be honest. It's believed that Sans is one of the two when Gaster says, "you too," which I'll get into later, but the connection between Gaster to Sans to Papyrus is like, well, they're all skeletons, so except I don't think Gaster is a skeleton. Even if we treat the mystery man as his canon appearance, I don't think it looks like a skeleton. To me, at least. Papyrus has the Gaster blasters, I guess, so there's probably a connection through Sans, but I don't think he's related to either of them. I will say because of the connection, I will at least let it sit at, maybe if you squint. I think this theory is plausible. It could be some of the great people who were caught up in the machine that ended up malfunctioning. Maybe that's who he's talking to. It could be Asgore. It could be Sans and Papyrus. That's related to the last theory. It could be two people who aren't even in this game. I think that there is enough evidence to imply that Sans and Alphys do sometimes work together. And Alphys is the real scientist in the place of Gaster, so since these are the only two I can think of who would be involved in those types of experiments, I'll put it as the most likely candidates if we're going with it's somebody from we know in the game. So it's plausible. So this is more related to the way the game is coded, but there are random events that can happen in any given game of Undertale, depending on if a random number is rolled when a game is created. And this value in the files is called the fun value. So this theory goes that the fun value is determining what timeline you're in. The guy doing the wrong number song only exists in some timelines. The great characters only exist in certain timelines. I like this theory. I don't know if Toby was thinking about that when he's making the game. He might have been more just like trying to keep new playthroughs fresh and interesting. But like, I think it's possible, and I think it's a fun way to look at it. I don't really think it breaks the lore or anything like that if you look at it this way, so I will at least put it in, it's plausible. This is one of those theories I saw a lot when Undertale first came out. Because monsters are made up of like mostly magic, I guess everyone assumes that monsters can never bleed. So I guess in people's minds, Sans is either not a monster or his like fucking ketchup bottle got slashed. This is obviously not the case. We see as early as tutorial, if you kill her, she gets a big ol' slash. I guess it's that Sans is colored red with his, but I think that was more like an artistic choice for emphasis. And Susie, in Deltarune Chapter 4, bleeds her hand, which we'll get into that later, so I'm gonna put this in crack theory. Monsters can bleed. I love this theory. Papyrus is one of the earliest boss fights you encounter, And he's not like particularly difficult. He's the same gimmick as Sans, the blue heart that gives you gravity. But Papyrus has no desire to kill you. If he gets low enough health, he just puts you in a cage that you can easily walk out of. He also seems to have gaster blasters like Sans, but the annoying dog gets that attack first. It does seem like he's deliberately holding back. Even Undyne says that he's pretty strong, but he's more of a lover than a fighter. So yeah, if he wasn't the goodest boy ever, he would be on a similar power footing as Sans, in my opinion. So, it's possible. This is another one of those that is treated as canon, but is never actually explicitly said to be canon in the game. The house next to Napstablook is full of diaries, and while the owner of the diary never signs off their name, they do mention being friends with Elfies, and how she was making them their ideal body, and that he wasn't going to abandon his cousin, Napstablook. It's very heavily implied that this unnamed cousin is Metaton, to the point that I think we can say pretty much, basically, it's confirmed. So the opening of Undertale is about Char and not Frisk. Frisk isn't the one who tripped. So did they throw themselves down the hole, hoping to die? I don't think so. They make so much of an effort to leave the underground, regardless of the path that they are on. And I don't see why Frisk, being a kid, couldn't have also just fallen. I just don't think there's enough evidence to prove it one way or the other, so maybe Squint. If we go with the theory that Sans and Elfies do sometimes work together, because they do definitely know each other, and if we take into consideration that they both keep dog food in their houses, then sure, I can see this connection. Except if the dog food is for the amalgamates, and Sans isn't just on a diet like he says, then why is it at his house? Also, knowing how Elfies is feeling with all the guilt keeping the secret, if they are friends, I imagine he'd tell her that he knew and offer to help. I don't know. I think it makes a bit of a plot hole for him as a good guy to not say anything to anyone about that if he knew. So for me personally, maybe Squint. So in Undertale, towards the end of the game, we discover that Asgore and Toriel's son, Asriel, is dead. He merged with his dead adopted sibling, went to the surface, the humans were scared of him and attacked him, so he went back to the underground, fatally wounded, and died in a field of flowers. Monsters in both body and soul expire and turn to dust upon death. Later, Elvis took one of these flowers that had Asriel's dust on it and injected it with liquid determination. Determination is what allows human souls to persist after death. When injected into monsters, however, things get weird. So the results of the flower experiment are also weird. A flower comes to life, and it has Asriel's memories, but it doesn't have his soul, or any soul. Souls in this universe are where compassion comes from, ergo, Flowey has no soul, ergo, Flowey has no compassion. Flowey not having Asriel's soul is a little strange to wrap your head around, especially on the pacifist route. So this theory states, hey, PTSD can mess with people's ability to express compassion. Sometimes. It's complicated. Asriel, he's gone through a lot. So maybe he has a soul and PTSD, and that's why he isn't compassionate. I thought this theory was kind of creative, but it's not really in line with what's being said in the canon. I think this is an interesting take because I do think Asriel is severely traumatized, and looking at him through that more cerebral lens is interesting, if done so responsibly. As Flowey is quite cruel, and you don't really want to conflate mental illness with cruelty. So for that reason, I'm gonna put it in maybe if you squint, because while I don't think it's correct, I do think it brings up an interesting framework for analysis. The souls we see in Undertale are differently colored, but is every single soul differently colored for every human? Or does it take on the color of the traits used the most? I think there's not enough evidence either way, but considering the link between colors and virtues, and considering how many humans do live and have lived, the idea that every single human has their own color, I find to be less likely than the idea they take on the color of the trait they resonate with. So, maybe if you squint. This is just a fun one. Frisk's sprite, when holding things, is always shown holding their left hand, so they get to join the club of iconic left-handed video game characters. Basically confirmed. This theory comes from one of Toriel's books going over monsters' history, but when the monsters were first sealed, they walked as far as they could until they hit the dead end of the cavern, and that dead end became home. As time went on, they decided to leave and make a new city by the barrier, called New Home, with monsters settling along the way. Theory goes that the reason the monsters went as far as they could was because they were worried about the humans coming through the barrier they made. You know, the monsters were weak, they just lost, they couldn't escape, who see the monsters when it come through and finish them off. And like, yeah, I think this would be a legitimate fear. So you put as much distance between them and yourself as possible. Once they didn't come, however, then the priority shifts to breaking the barrier. Ergo, they go to find the barrier, where the humans are, as they need human souls to break, again, said barrier. I think this theory is totally solid, so basically confirmed. I think it's possible as monsters do attack the humans, but the evidence cited for this theory is that there is dust on the human artifacts, specifically the tutu. Now, dead monsters do turn to dust, but we also see mentions of regular dust. Like, this hasn't been used in a while, so it's dusty. So if a tutu has been sitting on the ground for potentially decades, yeah, it'd be dusty. Considering that it's implied that Asgore has killed all the previous humans, the humans would need to get to Asgore, and they would encounter monsters along the way. But, in this game specifically, all regular monster encounters can be spared. So I think it's possible, but there's not enough evidence one way or the other. So, what do you say here? This is a fun thing that's easy to miss, but there are multiple lines of dialogue throughout the game that imply that all of Undertale is taking place on the same day. Even though you can sleep multiple times, it's always described as a short nap or snap. Characters will mention things that happened earlier in the game as earlier today. So I'm putting her in basically confirmed. It's just a fun aspect of the story that, you know, never picks up on when they see it. So this is related to another connected theory, which is there are points in the game where Frisk seems to not align with what you choose to do and the way that you would expect. For example, Frisk in the True Lab walks much slower towards the shower than normal. It's something that's out of the player's control. Sometimes the narrator explains things that are happening like, oh, you laughed at a joke. Oh, wait, you didn't? It also describes Frisk as running away from battles with a smile on more positive runs. The narration also changes the red text on genocide, and it's implied that Chara possesses Frisk on a genocide run, but no one possesses them on pacifist runs. So it seems that Frisk wouldn't be willing to go along with the more violent options without that outside possession and influence. And I do think that Frisk is aligned with good. As for how much control they have, I would say they have control over how they feel about the actions, but maybe not so much the actions themselves. Maybe a little bit, but it's pretty limited. So on a technicality, I'll put them both in it's plausible, even though I don't think that these are per descriptions of what's happening. This is another neat one. When Toriel leaves Asgore and goes to live in the ruins, she brings the body of Chara with her to give her proper burial. Chara and Azrael fell on a bed of flowers when they died. The seeds are described as sticky. So if they were sticky flower seeds on Chara's body, and they were buried at the ruins, and there happens to be a small spot with a bunch of flowers, and Azrael's ghost hangs out there at the end of the game, and the flowers don't appear in the flashback when Chara fell, yeah, I think we're looking at Chara's grave here. Basically confirmed. I don't think this is true. While humans do have more determination than monsters in general, Flowey has seemed to be in control of the world for a very long time. And I've never seen implication that the other humans have dethroned Flowey until Frisk, or I guess the player specifically through Frisk. I see where this theory is coming from, but I don't think that there's enough evidence to imply that every fallen human has more determination than Flowey. But it's not like a totally unsubstantiated take, so if she can hang out in, maybe squint. I think this theory is necessary for the theories that stem from the theories that involve Sans not being a monster or being a different type of monster, but this doesn't work well if that's not the theory you're subscribing to. They both mention being each other's brothers many times, and again, in this universe, monsters do tend to get with similar looking monsters, and families seem to be generally made up of the same type of monster. So even though Sans does seem to have more like self-awareness of the world that's going on around him, I don't think that's really enough evidence to say that they aren't related. So unless you need this to be true for related Sans theory, I think it's just gonna have to be crack theory for now. I think the gut reaction is, well, duh, they caused their own death. But I don't think they did this with the intention of just like wanting to be dead. One, they trip into the underground, they don't jump. And their death is supposed to look like it's a sickness. It's very deliberate, it's like a deception. And they are very much intending to murder the Azrael to get revenge on the humans. And considering that their spirit seems to really want to be trying to stick around, I think that them dying is more like an an unfortunate but necessary step towards her goal, rather than what we would traditionally think of as a suicidal person. So, maybe we went. I think this must be true, because if determination is what grants you that power, then I doubt that Flowey and Frisk happen to be the most determined people in the entire world. But I could definitely see them as the most determined people in the underground. And I think the idea that the entire world above the underground is being affected by this to be massively consequential. And surely that would have been addressed if that was the case. So I don't see any real evidence for it, and I think it would make things just way too honestly complicated and messy. I'm pretty sure the save and reset thing is a very specific thing to the realm of monsters, so crack theory. There's a scene that you can have with Sans like Rilby's where he mentions that there's a flower saying weird things to his brother. He says it's an echo flower and someone is using it to prank Papyrus. However, Papyrus also mentions through a phone call late in the game that he has a flower friend. Flowey mentions Papyrus by name, and I don't think it's too much of a leap to say that the echo flower Sans was referring to was probably Flowey. And Flowey has, for whatever reason, been paying special attention to Papyrus. So, basically confirmed. Okay, this one's just a fun one. Let me just point out some of the evidence for this theory for you. They both speak in capital letters with no asterisks. Papyrus likes puzzles. The core is kind of like a puzzle. Papyrus just likes the Hotlands. The true lab is in the Hotlands. They're both involved with phones. Papyrus has Gaster blasters. I could go on, but I'm not going to. It's all like very tangentially related things. I think we can really safely put this in a... Perhaps there is some connection between the two, but I do not believe that Papyrus is literally Gaster. At the end of a genocide run, Frisk, possessed by Chara, will kill Flowey. There is no way for the player to spare them. They will always be killed. Chara never says why, and it does seem to be strange that they would kill their only real friend and confidant. The theory goes that Chara killed Flowey because they felt betrayed by them. Azrael does say that he and Chara both share control over their merged form, back when, they did the frog cubs into the surface, all that. And Azrael had to deliberately go against Chara's wishes to kill the humans and basically force them back into the underground to die. Flowey also warns Asgore about Chara on the genocide run. And when Chara does kill him, Flowey destroys Asgore's soul, which basically dooms them to be trapped. They can't escape to the surface without it. So at this point in the story, I don't think Chara is seeing Flowey as their friend and their brother. I think they do feel betrayed by them and like they aren't actually on their side. So, once he outlives his usefulness, they get their revenge. I think that this is the best theory as to why this is, so I'm gonna put it basically confirmed. Alphys is directly responsible for the amalgamations, and she feels immense guilt and shame over this. It's something that weighs so heavily on her that she mentions doing something cowardly. In certain neutral endings, specifically ones where Mettaton and Undyne are killed, she disappears. They don't know where she is when they give you a call, that update call, or she just doesn't appear on the call. The implication here is vague, but it basically suggests that Alphys either runs away from society to escape taking responsibility for her actions, or she commits suicide. I think the latter is the more popular interpretation, especially since this disappearance does also happen when her friends, her support network, are killed. I think this interpretation, while being the saddest, is probably the most likely. So sadly, it's gonna have to go in. Basically confirmed. So Chara was not obviously a great person, but was she actually actively abusing her brother, or was he just an unwilling casualty of whatever was wrong with them? Because abuse is very deliberate. Generally, emotional abuse is characterized by invalidation, guilt tripping, belittling, and humiliation. It's manipulation. The abuser will try to make their victim do what they want using these methods, and will then make excuses to absolve themselves of blame or shift the guilt to someone else. Basically do anything except take accountability. They then go back to their normal self, lull their victims back into a false sense of security. they plan their next move, and then the abuse starts again. That's why abuse is described as a cycle. And it's why the abusers can manipulate the victims for so long. If the abuser is nothing but cruel, well, their victim isn't gonna like them too much, and it's most likely gonna piece out of that relationship. If the abuser spends a lot of time being kind, or funny, or charming, or even loving, then things get weird for the victim, because this leaves them in this space of uncertainty, where maybe this time is the last time they're gonna be cruel. You know, they always stop being cruel at some point, so, you know, what's to say that point they'll stay that way? Say they won't at some point stay being loving. It's actually not uncommon for the victim to look up to or even love their abuser. If they didn't, then they wouldn't be sticking around to be abused, right? Azrael loves Chara, no doubt about it. But if you look at the tapes in the True Labs, look at the way Chara treats Azrael, look at the way Flowey talks about Chara, he reinforces the idea that Chara manipulates people into loving them, and that he is legitimately scared to go against their wishes for fear of retaliation. Even to the point of going along to their suicide mission or the eradication of all monsters. There's way too much for me to go for every single thing, for every single point of evidence, but I do highly recommend that you read this theory for yourself. I have all these theories linked in a big old list on my Ko-Fi, and if you're going to check some of these out, this is going to be one of my top recommendations. So I'm putting it in basically confirmed. There is a mysterious proto-lab thing in Sands of Papyrus' shed, and it's not exactly clear if they know what is in there, but there are multiple unexplained things in there. I covered most of that in the Sansa's Nest theory, but an alternate explanation is that those hard-to-read blueprints are written in wingdings, and that the broken machine under the tarp is in fact Gaster's machine. This does tie into another theory, which is that there's this idea that even though Gaster has been scattered, his ideas and inventions, or at least the blueprints of it, still exist in the Undertale timeline we're playing in. He was a real scientist after all, so it's not like it's a totally outlandish theory. The determination machine specifically is theorized to be this bird skull looking thing, and people think that Gaster's a skeleton, which again, I don't think we're really good evidence for that, but I digress. Because even if the mystery man is Gaster, there isn't enough evidence to really confirm or deny either. I think the machine is interesting, and I think the possibility of the hard-to-read text being wingdings does make it a little bit stronger. So that one can hang out in it's plausible. But for the determination machine, I don't think there's enough evidence to say where the machine is, or that LPs didn't create it. So that one's gonna go in maybe if you sweat. I wanted the last Undertale theory to be a banger, and this is a really cool theory that people seem to universally like, even if they don't personally subscribe to it. It's another really long one that I can't get into every single detail for in the interest of time, but I will go over some of the major points. Chara does speak in first person on the genocide route. Any red text, that is specifically Chara speaking. But Chara will also speak with white text, occasionally, on that same route. Chara, when speaking, will always speak in first person, but will refer to Frisk in the third person. In the game, you are always referred to by the third person. Sometimes the narrator describes things that don't happen, like in the amalgamation fight with Snowdrake's mother. The narrator also sometimes describes things in a way that could retroactively be linked back to Chara. The idea that Chara is present and narrating everything to us regardless of the route is just so out there, I almost want to dismiss it on principle, but the evidence isn't necessarily in contradiction of anything. And the way it would make one engage with the text is so interesting. And I think I want to be generous and let it exist in it's plausible. I don't really think that this was Toby's intention necessarily, if I'm being completely honest, but I think it's a really cool interpretation. I love revisiting these theories. It's been 10 years, so understandably there is a lot to choose from, but I did do my best to try to find like a good spectrum of theories and try to pick ones that were at least like interesting. Obviously, I had to paraphrase a lot of these and leave out details in the interest of time. So if there is an element to the theory that I left out, that is why. If you want more context, definitely check out the list of links to those theories. And if you don't agree with my placement on these theories, that's totally cool. Doesn't hurt my feelings. You are more than welcome to tell me your rankings in the comments. And if you also include what evidence you're using to support your ranking, I think that would also be super cool, because I love learning about other people's perspectives and why they think the way they do. I'm sure the people reading the comments would appreciate it too.